He was already tired when the flight began. Long shifts did that to pilots. Hours of waiting, weather briefings, routine checks, and then another sky full of silence. The aircraft climbed smoothly, cutting through thin clouds as the city disappeared below. Everything felt normal, almost boring. In the cockpit, the crew spoke in short, practice sentences. Nothing unusual, just another flight. Far away, on a different frequency, a calm female voice came through the radio.
I'm Falcon.
I see a problem with your right engine. The cockpit went quiet for a second. Then one of the pilots let out a short laugh. Not a cruel one, just tired and dismissive. Falcon? He said into the mic. We don't have any Falcon escort. Check your channel. The voice returned, steady but firm. I'm on the right channel. Your engine pressure readings don't match your vibration pattern. You're about to lose it. The pilots exchanged a glance. This kind of thing happens sometimes. Random calls. Overconfident hobby flyers. People who misunderstood instruments. They trusted their own displays more than an unknown voice. The engine gauges looked fine. No warning lights. No alarms. We're stable, the pilot replied. Everything's green. There was a pause. Then her voice came back, softer now, but urgent. You have less than 2 minutes. Reduce throttle. Now. Another pilot shook his head. We're not taking instructions from a ghost on the radio. Inside the cockpit, the mood stayed relaxed. Coffee cups sat in their holders. The hum of the engines was constant and familiar. Passengers behind them were reading, sleeping, unaware that anything unusual had just been said. But somewhere above and behind the aircraft, she was watching. Not with eyes but with training. With patterns drilled into her until they became instinct. She had seen this combination before. Slight vibration. Delayed pressure change. A failure that never announced itself until it was too late. Her hands tightened around her controls as she listened to the engines sound through the shared frequency. It wasn't loud yet. That was the danger. Quiet failures killed pilots. Please, she said again. I'm not guessing. This time her voice cracked just slightly. The pilots noticed that. One of them frowned. Did you hear that? He asked. Before anyone could answer, the cockpit shook. Not hard, just enough to feel wrong. A warning chime sounded once. Then again. The right engine temperature spiked suddenly, leaping past normal limits. The vibration needle jumped like it had been slapped. What the? One pilot muttered. Before the checklist could even be opened, the engine exploded. It wasn't a fireball like in movies. It was worse. A sharp, violent bang that ripped through the aircraft's frame. The plane lurched sideways. Alarms screamed at once. Lights flashed red across the panel. Smoke filled the cockpit with a bitter smell. Passengers gasped as the aircraft dropped for a terrifying second. Engine failure, one pilot shouted, hands flying across switches. The radio crackled again. I told you, the voice said, but now it wasn't calm. It was strained, human, real. The pilots fought the controls, stabilizing the aircraft. Training kicked in. Years of muscle memory took over. They shut down the destroyed engine, contained the fire, and leveled the wings. The plane was hurt, but still flying. Breathing hard, one of them grabbed the radio. Falcon, say again. Who are you? There was a pause longer than before. Static filled the gap. Then she spoke, slower now, as if holding herself together. I'm a test pilot, she said. I was monitoring the corridor for another aircraft. Your data leaked into my system. I recognized the pattern. Her voice trembled again, this time not from fear, but from relief. I didn't think you'd ignore me. The cockpit was silent except for alarms now fading as systems stabilized. We're diverting, the lead pilot said quietly. We owe you our lives. She didn't respond right away. Below them, the ground came closer as they turned toward the nearest runway. Passengers were crying now. Some were praying. Some held hands with strangers. None of them knew how close they had come to never seeing the ground again. When her voice finally returned, it was barely above a whisper. Next time, don't laugh. The radio went silent. In the cockpit, no one spoke. Not out of fear anymore, but something heavier. Humility, because they had learned something no manual ever taught them. Sometimes the warning doesn't come from a screen. Sometimes it comes from a voice you almost ignore. The aircraft was still shaking when the crew finally caught their breath. The alarms had stopped screaming, but the silence felt heavier than the noise ever did. One engine was gone. Not damaged, gone. The checklist lay open, pages trembling slightly with the movement of the plane. The captain steadied his voice and spoke to air traffic control, reporting the failure and requesting an emergency landing. His words were calm, professional, but inside his chest his heart was racing. He had been flying for decades, yet moments like this never became routine. Every emergency felt personal. Every second mattered. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin was no longer calm. Passengers had felt the explosion, the sudden drop, the sharp turn. Oxygen masks hadn't fallen, but fear had. Some people were crying quietly. Others stared forward, frozen. A child asked his mother why the plane had jumped. She didn't answer. She just held him tighter. Up above and slightly behind, the woman who called herself Falcon stayed on the frequency, listening. Her hands hovered near her controls, but she didn't interfere. She knew when to step back. She also knew the danger wasn't over. An engine explosion often caused hidden damage. Fuel lines, wing structure, sensors that lied after trauma. She replayed the last moments in her mind. The laugh, the disbelief, the delay. It wasn't anger she felt. It was frustration mixed with something closer to fear. Not fear for herself, but for how easily experience could turn into arrogance. In the cockpit, the first officer finally broke the silence. If we'd listened sooner. His sentence didn't need finishing. The captain nodded once. Regret was useless now, but the thought wouldn't leave him. That voice on the radio hadn't panicked. She hadn't exaggerated. She had sounded like someone who had seen death up close and recognized its footsteps. He keyed the mic again. Falcon, if you're still there, we could use your eyes. There was a pause, then her response came back, measured. I'm here. Your left wing took debris. Watch your fuel imbalance. Don't trust the auto readout. That got their attention instantly. How do you know? The first officer asked. Because the vibration frequency changed after the explosion, she replied. Your systems will lag. Yours always do. She wasn't insulting them. She was stating fact. Machines reacted slower than trained instincts. As the plane descended, the crew followed her guidance along with their own procedures. She didn't command. She suggested, adjust here. Watch that. Delay the turn by 10 seconds. Each small correction made the aircraft feel more stable, more obedient. On the ground, emergency crews lined the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, people trained for worst-case scenarios waited with engines running. From the tower, controllers watched the damaged aircraft approach, its profile slightly uneven, one engine silent. In the cabin, a flight attendant moved through the aisle, forcing a calm smile she didn't feel. We're preparing for landing, she said softly. Please stay seated. Some passengers noticed the smell now. Burnt metal, fuel. Reality was settling in. The captain's hands were slick with sweat, but his grip was firm. He trusted her now, the unseen pilot in the sky. He didn't know her face, her age, or her past, but he trusted her judgment. Runway in sight, he announced. Falcon exhaled slowly on her end. She had been holding her breath without realizing it. Stay gentle, she said. Don't force it. The aircraft touched down hard but straight. Tires screamed. The remaining engine roared as reverse thrust engaged. Fire crews followed closely as the plane slowed, finally coming to a stop in a cloud of smoke and steam. For a moment, no one moved. Then applause broke out in the cabin. Shaky, tearful applause. People laughed and cried at the same time. Strangers hugged. A man whispered thank you to no one in particular. In the cockpit, the captain closed his eyes briefly. Alive. Everyone alive. He reached for the radio one last time. Falcon, we're down. There was relief in her reply, but also exhaustion. Good. Who are you? He asked again, more gently this time. We should report this. You saved a lot of people today. She hesitated. I don't need credit, she said. Just remember what happened. The channel filled with static, then cleared. She was gone. Later, long after the passengers were safe and the aircraft sat silent on the runway, the captain stood alone near the cockpit window. The sky outside looked the same as it always did. Blue, calm, innocent. But he wasn't the same, because somewhere in that sky was a pilot whose warning he had almost ignored, a voice he had laughed at, a lesson that had arrived wrapped in fire and fear. And he knew this was only the beginning of that lesson, not the end. Days passed, but the incident refused to fade. For the crew, sleep came in short pieces. Every time their eyes closed, they heard the bang again, felt the sudden drop, saw the warning lights explode into red. Training taught pilots how to survive emergencies, but it never taught them how to forget them. The investigation began quietly. Engineers examined the damaged aircraft inch by inch. Charred metal, shattered components, a failure pattern that looked clean on paper but ugly in reality. One senior engineer shook his head as he reviewed the data. This should have been caught earlier, he muttered. But the system didn't flag it in time. That sentence stayed with the captain. Didn't flag it in time. In the cockpit recording, investigators heard the laughter. Not mocking, not cruel, just disbelief. A moment of human weakness wrapped in confidence. Then the warning. Then the explosion. When the audio reached the woman's voice, the room went quiet. Who was she? Someone asked. No one had an answer. Her call sign didn't belong to any registered escort flight in the area. No military traffic logged officially. No civilian aircraft was supposed to be that close. And yet, her analysis had been flawless. More accurate than the plane's own systems. That disturbed people. Meanwhile, the passengers returned to their lives carrying invisible scars. One stopped flying altogether. Another booked a seat on a train for the first time in years. A woman who had been on that flight started waking up before dawn, heart racing, convinced she heard engines failing in the dark. Survival didn't mean peace. The captain was asked to speak at a closed safety briefing. No cameras. No press. Just pilots, engineers, and officials. People who understood the sky. He stood in front of the room, hands steady, voice honest. We trusted the instruments, he said. We didn't trust the warning. No one interrupted. She heard something we didn't, saw a pattern we ignored. And because of that, we were seconds from losing everyone on board. He didn't mention the laugh. He didn't need to. Everyone had heard it. That night, alone in a quiet hotel room, the captain replayed the radio call again and again. Not the explosion. The voice before it. Calm, clear, almost pleading. He wondered what it took for someone like her to speak up knowing she wouldn't be believed. Somewhere else, far from meetings and reports, Falcon sat alone in a hangar lit by one flickering light. Her aircraft was grounded for inspection just like his. She leaned against the cold metal and stared at the floor. She had broken protocol that day. She knew it. Monitoring a corridor was routine. Speaking up without clearance was not. But she had seen the pattern too many times in training simulations. The delay, the false calm, the moment when confidence became the enemy. Her hands still shook when she remembered the laugh on the radio. Not because it hurt her pride, because it almost cost lives. A supervisor approached quietly. You caused some noise, he said. A lot of questions. She nodded. I know. They want a report. Full timeline. She exhaled slowly. I'll give it. He studied her for a moment. You did the right thing. She didn't answer. Doing the right thing didn't always feel right afterward. Weeks later, a revised safety bulletin circulated quietly through aviation circles. It talked about cross-signal analysis, about listening for anomalies beyond visual indicators, about not dismissing external warnings, even when they came from unexpected sources. No names were mentioned. No incident was highlighted. But pilots noticed. In cockpits around the world, small habits began to change. A pause before dismissing a call. A second look at vibration data. A reminder spoken aloud. Listen first. The captain returned to flying. His first flight back was short, routine, uneventful. Still, when a voice came through the radio with a correction, minor, almost insignificant, he listened fully before responding. So did his crew. High above, Falcon flew again too. Same skies, same engines, same risks, but something had shifted. Not in the aircraft, but in her. She no longer wondered if speaking up was worth it. She had seen the outcome, and though the world would never know her name, her warning had changed something invisible but powerful, the space between certainty and humility. Because in aviation, survival isn't just about skill. It's about listening. And sometimes, the voice that saves you is the one you almost ignore. The official report was filed, sealed, and quietly archived. To the outside world, the incident became just another technical failure handled successfully. A headline that appeared for a day, then disappeared under newer news. But for the people who lived through it, nothing was over. The captain began noticing changes in himself. Before, his hands moved through checklists automatically. Now every switch carried weight. Every sound mattered. He listened not just to instruments, but to the aircraft itself. The rhythm of the engines, the subtle vibrations that couldn't be measured easily. Experience had given him confidence. That flight had given him caution. On a late evening flight weeks later, turbulence shook the cabin lightly. Nothing serious. Still, his body tensed instantly. His co-pilot noticed. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," the captain replied after a pause. "Just listening." That word stayed with him. Listening. Not long after, he received a message asking him to attend a simulator review session. The focus wasn't the explosion. It was the moment before it. Investigators wanted pilots to feel what the instruments showed when the failure was still hiding. In the simulator, everything looked normal until it wasn't. The delay between truth and warning was terrifying. Several pilots failed the test. They trusted the green lights too much. The captain passed, not because he was better, but because he waited. He hesitated just long enough to question what he saw. When asked why, his answer was simple. "I've learned that silence can lie." Elsewhere, Falcon faced her own quiet consequences. Her intervention had saved lives, but it had also exposed weaknesses in protocol. Some people were uncomfortable with that. Systems were supposed to be perfect. Humans were supposed to follow them, not challenge them. She was grounded again, not as punishment, but as procedure. Evaluations, interviews, long conversations where her words were dissected. Why did she speak? Why didn't she wait for clearance? What made her so certain? She answered the same way every time. "I recognized the pattern." That wasn't enough for some people. In private, she replayed the moment again and again. The laugh, the disbelief, the second she almost stayed silent. That thought haunted her more than the explosion. If she had hesitated, she never finished that sentence in her mind. One evening, as she prepared to leave the facility, she received a message. Short, official. The captain had requested to speak with her. She considered ignoring it. Instead, she agreed. They met in a quiet briefing room. No uniforms on display. No ranks. Just two pilots sitting across from each other, both changed by the same moment. "I owe you an apology," the captain said first. He didn't try to soften it. "I laughed. I was wrong." She studied his face. Tired eyes. Honest voice. "You survived," she said. "That's what matters." "It matters how," he replied. "And why?" Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. "I didn't speak to be believed," she finally said. "I spoke because I couldn't stay quiet." He nodded slowly. "I understand that now." They talked for less than 20 minutes. No dramatic speeches. No praise. Just shared understanding. When they stood to leave, he paused. "You changed how I fly." She didn't respond right away. Then simply, "Good." After that meeting, something shifted again. Not loudly, not officially, but quietly. Word traveled. Pilots began asking different questions. Instructors adjusted how they taught. Young trainees were told something new. Don't just watch the instruments. Listen to the sky. Falcon returned to active duty. The captain logged flight after flight. The memory of that explosion never left them, but it no longer haunted them. It guided them, because some lessons don't come from textbooks. They come from moments when pride cracks, engines fail, and a voice you almost ignored becomes the reason everyone lives. Time moved on, as it always does, but it moved differently for those who had been there. Months after the incident, the flight number was quietly retired. The damaged aircraft was stripped down, studied, and eventually dismantled. Its parts would never fly together again. Some scars were not meant to be repaired. The captain found himself mentoring younger pilots more often. Not formally, just conversations in hallways, briefings that ran a little longer than scheduled. He noticed how quickly confidence formed in new pilots, how easily clean dashboards and perfect simulations created a sense of control. He didn't criticize. He told stories. Pay attention to what doesn't make noise, he would say. That's where trouble hides. They listened. Falcon, meanwhile, was invited into rooms she had never expected to enter. Design reviews, safety workshops, quiet discussions with engineers who spent more time with equations than with aircraft. At first, she felt out of place. Then she realized why she was there. She wasn't there to explain machines. She was there to explain judgment. She described the moment she knew something was wrong. Not a single gauge. Not one alarm. A combination that didn't belong together. Engineers leaned forward as she spoke. They asked questions. They took notes. One of them finally said, "Our systems don't think like that." She nodded. That's why people still matter. Changes followed, but slowly. Aviation never rushed improvements. It learned carefully, often after paying a price. New training modules appeared. They didn't mention explosions. They focused on uncertainty, on how to respond when data felt wrong even if it looked right. Pilots were taught to say one sentence more often, "Let's double-check." The captain heard it on his own flights now. From co-pilots, from trainees. That sentence made him breathe easier. One afternoon, he received a letter. Handwritten. Rare in a digital world. It was from a passenger who had been on that flight. The letter didn't mention fear or panic. It talked about a second birthday, about watching a sunset that almost never happened, about gratitude for strangers in a cockpit and a voice on a radio. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his flight bag, not as a reminder of danger, but of purpose. Falcon received messages too, though most never reached her directly. She heard about them through others. Lives that continued, children that grew, ordinary moments that existed because someone had spoken up. Still, she kept her distance from recognition. She avoided interviews. She declined mentions. She returned to the sky, where she felt most honest. Up there, titles didn't matter. Only decisions did. On a clear morning, their paths crossed again. Not in person, but on the radio. Different flight, different airspace, routine coordination. "Good morning," the captain said, recognizing the call sign instantly. "Morning," she replied. Nothing else was said. Nothing needed to be. Both of them knew what that silence held. Years later, the story would be told quietly in training rooms, never dramatized, never exaggerated. No hero names, no headlines, just a lesson passed from one pilot to another. Listen when someone warns you, even if they sound unsure, even if they come from nowhere, even if you think you know better. Because in the sky, certainty can be dangerous, and humility can be the difference between a safe landing and a story that never gets told. Years passed, and the incident slowly turned into a reference point rather than a wound. In training centers, it was no longer called that engine failure. It became a scenario, a moment frozen in simulations, replayed again and again for new pilots who had never felt real fear at 30,000 feet. The captain was older now. Not slow, not tired, just seasoned. His logbook was thick with hours, but the lesson from that day sat heavier than all the rest combined. When asked what experience taught him, he never talked about weather or landings. He talked about listening. Skill keeps you flying, he told trainees. Listening keeps you alive. They wrote it down. Falcon had moved into a role few pilots ever reached. She still flew, but she also observed. She watched others fly, quietly evaluating decisions the way she once studied vibration patterns. She didn't correct often. When she did, people paid attention. Because they knew her reputation. Not the story, the outcome. One day, during a routine multi-aircraft exercise, a young pilot hesitated before dismissing a minor anomaly. The data looked fine. The manuals suggested no action. But something felt off. He spoke up. "I might be wrong," he said. "But can we check this?" The exercise paused. Falcon listened to the exchange from her station and allowed herself a small smile. Not pride. Relief. The habit had spread. The sky had learned. The captain experienced his final emergency years later. Not dramatic. No explosions. Just a sensor disagreement at altitude. In the past, he might have trusted the dominant reading and moved on. This time, he slowed everything down. He asked questions. He listened. The landing was uneventful. Afterward, as he shut down the engines, he sat for a moment longer than usual. He thought of the laughter that once filled his cockpit, of the voice that cracked over the radio, of how close certainty had come to becoming tragedy. Falcon watched her last trainee complete a check ride flawlessly. As they walked off the runway, the trainee turned and said, "Thank you for teaching me when to doubt." She nodded. "Doubt is not weakness," she replied. "Ignoring it is." The sky continued to claim pilots who didn't listen. That never changed. But fewer of them fell to the same mistake. The culture had shifted just slightly, enough to matter. Somewhere, passengers boarded flights every day, unaware of the invisible decisions keeping them safe. They trusted the wings, the engines, the people up front. They never knew about Falcon. They didn't need to, because her legacy wasn't a name or a medal. It was a pause before dismissal, a question asked instead of a laugh, a moment where a pilot chose humility over pride. And in aviation, that moment was everything. The story never ended with applause or headlines. It ended the way most real stories do, quietly, with people carrying lessons forward without ever saying where they came from. The captain retired on an ordinary day. No ceremony in the sky, just a final landing, smooth and controlled, exactly how he liked it. As he shut down the engines for the last time, he rested his hands on the controls a moment longer than necessary. He wasn't thinking about awards or hours flown. He was thinking about a voice on the radio that had changed how he lived, not just how he flew. Falcon flew her last mission years later. No one announced it. No one needed to. She landed, taxied in, and powered down as she had hundreds of times before. When she stepped out onto the tarmac, the air felt lighter. Not because the risks were gone, but because she had done what she believed in every single time. Their paths never crossed again. They didn't need to. What mattered had already happened. In classrooms, instructors continued telling a simple truth to new pilots. The most dangerous moment in a cockpit is when you stop listening. Students nodded, some understanding, some not yet. Understanding came later, it always did. Somewhere in the sky, another pilot heard an unexpected voice on the radio. Correction. Concern. Nothing dramatic. Just information that didn't match the instruments perfectly. This time, there was no laughter. There was a pause. Then a question. And because of that pause, a flight landed safely. Passengers walked away. Life continued without knowing how close it had come to ending. That was the real ending of the story. Not the explosion. Not the fear. But the change. A small shift in behavior that saved people who would never know why. Falcon's voice faded into memory, but her impact stayed alive in every cockpit where humility replaced certainty. In every moment where someone chose to listen instead of dismiss. The sky didn't remember names. It remembered decisions. And somewhere above the clouds, in the space between warning and disaster, that decision kept making the difference, again and again. Because sometimes, survival begins with a voice you almost ignore. And sometimes, listening is the bravest thing a pilot can do.